The stage was set. The studio shimmered under the glow of overhead lights, polished surfaces reflecting the gleam of a high-production set. Every detail had been curated for perfection. The pristine desk, the subtle blue backdrop, the hum of anticipation in the air. Cameras glided into position, their lenses trained on the stage, capturing every angle of the moment about to unfold. The audience, a mix of hand-picked industry insiders and lucky guests, whispered among themselves, phones gripped tightly as they waited for the interview to begin. Then, the music swelled. That familiar, upbeat jingle that signaled the Martin Langley show was live. A burst of applause followed as Martin Langley, the renowned and infamous interviewer, strolled onto the stage with his usual effortless charm. He waved to the audience, his tailored suit crisp under the studio lights, his smile sharp and knowing. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as ever. "Tonight, we have a guest who needs no introduction, yet I'll give him one anyway, because, quite frankly, he deserves it." The applause softened, replaced by an eager hush. Langley paced a little, drawing out the moment. He loved this part, the slow, deliberate build-up, keeping the audience hooked on every word. How many actors, he mused, can say they've defined an entire genre? Who else has run across the silver screen for 4 decades, sometimes literally, and still remained Hollywood's most bankable star? He let the question hang for dramatic effect before flashing a knowing smirk. Who else could hang off the side of a plane at 60 and make us believe he's just getting started? A murmur of excitement passed through the room. Langley turned toward the stage entrance. "Please welcome Tom Cruise." The applause erupted, cameras snapping as Tom strode onto the set with that signature stride. Confident, effortless. He gave a brief wave, the kind that was warm yet controlled, before shaking Langley's hand and taking his seat across from him. Tom had done this 1,000 times before. The chair felt familiar, the studio lights, the smiling audience. It was routine, comfortable. Langley leaned forward, hands clasped together on the desk, his grin unwavering. "Tom," he said smoothly, "you've had an incredible career. 4 decades of blockbuster films, record-breaking stunts, and, let's be honest, you don't seem to age. Either you have a secret, or you really did make a deal with Hollywood's gods." The audience chuckled, and Tom let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "No secret, just good old-fashioned hard work." Langley tilted his head slightly. "Hard work, right." He tapped a finger against the desk just once. "But you're not here to talk about your past, are you?" Tom felt it then, that quiet shift in the air. Something was coming. Tom adjusted in his seat, offering a relaxed smile. He'd done this too many times to count. Promotional circuits, interviews, press junkets. He knew the drill. Langley leaned in slightly, all charm and curiosity. "You know, Tom," he began, "I rewatched Top Gun Maverick last night, and I have to say, still just as thrilling as the first time. You gave people a real movie experience. None of that green screen magic, just you, gravity, and some very expensive aircraft." The audience chuckled, nodding in agreement. Tom grinned. "Yeah, we don't do half measures on set. If it's possible, I'll do it for real." Langley raised an eyebrow. "Possible or slightly insane?" Tom laughed, shaking his head. "A little bit of both, probably." "Speaking of insane," Langley continued, shifting in his chair, "I have to ask. You've jumped out of planes, climbed the tallest building in the world, hung off a plane mid-flight. Is there anything that genuinely terrifies you?" Tom paused, considering. "You know, people expect me to say something like sharks or heights, but honestly, letting people down, that's always been my biggest fear, whether it's my cast, my crew, or the audience. I put everything into my work, and I want people to feel that." The crowd responded with an appreciative murmur. Langley smiled, but there was something behind it now, something just a touch too rehearsed. "Interesting," he mused. "So authenticity matters to you?" Tom nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely." Langley steepled his fingers, his smile widening ever so slightly. "That's good to know," he said. Tom caught it then, the way the interviewer shifted in his seat, the way a couple of camera operators exchanged a quick glance. Something was about to happen. Langley gestured toward the large screen behind them. "Because we've got a little something to show you, something the world has been talking about. And Tom, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tom frowned slightly. The screen behind them flickered to life. And then he saw himself. At least, that's what it looked like. The setting on the screen was unfamiliar. An upscale private lounge, dimly lit, the kind of place where industry giants whispered about things the public would never hear. Tom watched himself sit across from another man, whose back was facing the camera, drink in hand, an easy smirk on his face. The voice was his, the mannerisms were his. The way the figure leaned back, casually confident, almost arrogant, it was uncannily accurate. But something in Tom's gut twisted. Then, the other him spoke. People really think I'm out here risking my life for a movie? Come on. The stunt guys do their thing and I just make it look real. That's Hollywood, man. You sell the illusion. A low murmur rippled through the studio audience. Tom's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. On the screen, fake Tom chuckled, swirling the liquid in his glass. I mean, you ever wonder why I never get injured? Because I don't actually do half of what they say I do. The press eats it up. Tom Cruise jumps out of a plane. Tom Cruise dangles from a skyscraper. It's all smoke and mirrors. The greatest trick I ever pulled was convincing the world I do my own stunts. The camera cut to Langley, who was watching Tom intently, like a predator waiting for a reaction. The video wasn't over. Honestly, I let the real guys take the risks. I just smile for the camera. People don't want the truth. They want a hero. So I give them one. A long pause followed before the screen faded to black. Silence filled the studio, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, no one moved. The clip had been short, less than 20 seconds, but its impact was immense. It lingered in the air like a bad taste, twisting everything people thought they knew about Tom Cruise. Tom sat frozen, not because he believed what he had just seen, but because he knew how many people would. A man in the third row, a longtime fan, felt his stomach drop. He had grown up idolizing Tom, watched Top Gun so many times he could recite the lines in his sleep, marveled at how the actor seemed ageless, fearless. And now? Now he wasn't sure what to believe. Had it all been fake? A woman in a sleek black dress leaned toward her husband, whispering, "This can't be real, can it?" Her husband folded his arms, eyes still on the darkened screen. I don't know. It sounds and looks like him. Further back, a group of film students exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a young man with thick-rimmed glasses, muttered, I mean, we do know Hollywood works like that, right? Maybe he just finally admitted it. Next to him, a girl shook her head. But this is Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise. He's the guy who broke his ankle jumping between buildings. He wouldn't just say that. Up front, an older man, someone who had worked in the industry long enough to know how things really operated, stared at Tom, studying his face, his body language. He had seen actors lie before, had witnessed careers crash and burn under the weight of scandal. Tom wasn't just sitting still, he was calculating. Langley shifted in his seat, soaking in the moment. The reaction was exactly what he had hoped for: uncertainty, doubt, whispers growing into murmurs. Tom blinked, his jaw tightening as the weight of the moment settled over him. He turned back to Langley, who was watching him with a thin smile, fingers steepled like a man who had just laid out a winning hand. Langley leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. So, Tom, what do you have to say about that? The studio remained eerily quiet. Even the audience, always primed to react, held their breath. Tom's stomach clenched. He knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a trap, a setup designed to shake him, to make him defensive, to make it look like he had something to prove. Langley continued, his voice silky and insistent. I mean, let's be real here, Tom. You've built a legacy on being the action star. The guy who does his own stunts, pushes the limits, defies Hollywood norms. But what if? He let the sentence dangle, his smirk widening. What if the truth is a little less glamorous? Tom's fingers curled around the armrest of his chair. He could feel the weight of the room pressing in, the cameramen waiting for a reaction, the producers backstage glued to their monitors, the millions watching at home waiting. He had a choice. He could lash out, demand the clip be discredited immediately. But that would only feed the fire, give people a reason to doubt him. Or he could stay calm, dissect it, control the narrative before it controlled him. Langley glanced at his notes and tapped his pen against the desk. He said slowly, "Here's the thing, Tom. People want to believe the truth, but they also want to believe a lie when it's more convenient." He turned toward the audience now, speaking as if he were leading a jury. After all, why would someone go to all the trouble of making a video like this unless there was some truth to it? A murmur rippled through the crowd again. Tom sat still, but inside he felt a flicker of anger. This wasn't just about a viral clip anymore. This was an attack on who he was. Then, from the front row, a woman with sharp red nails tapped her fingers against the armrest and scoffed. "Let's be honest. Did we really think he was doing all those crazy stunts himself? Come on, it's all smoke and mirrors." That was when someone called out the question that changed everything. "Come on, Tom. Be honest. Do you do all your own stunts?" Tom inhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. He could feel it now, the slow, creeping shift of the room. They weren't just watching a scandal unfold. They were deciding if they believed it. And in that moment, he knew he had to choose his next words carefully. Behind the polished veneer of the studio set, the atmosphere was anything but controlled. Producers and crew members huddled around multiple monitors, their faces a mixture of disbelief and tension. Some relayed frantic messages through their headsets, while others stood frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. Jessica Reed, a junior producer barely out of film school, turned to her colleague, her fingers gripping the edge of the control desk. That wasn't real, right?" Her voice was shaky, more hopeful than certain. Ethan, a seasoned production assistant with a decade in live television, crossed his arms and let out a sharp breath. "It's gotta be." But even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. Further down the hall, the show's director, Phil Caldwell, a wiry man in a fitted black suit, was pacing in furious strides. "Who the hell approved this segment?" His voice was sharp, barely contained. "Langley was supposed to push boundaries, not hijack the damn show." The studio's production coordinator, Emma Blake, flipped through her clipboard with trembling fingers, stammered, I don't think even Langley knew how bad this would look. The clip came in last minute. Someone from digital ran a check, but no." "That's exactly the problem," Phil snapped as he interrupted her, rubbing his temple. "We just played an unverified video on live television about Tom Cruise of all people. We're talking lawsuits. We're talking studio blacklisting. We're talking a PR nightmare of epic proportions." Meanwhile, in the dressing rooms, a group of VIP guests, some actors, some executives, all equally rattled, were engaged in hushed but urgent conversation. Margaret Sinclair, a veteran actress draped in an elegant shawl, shook her head. If that video is real, then Hollywood's biggest illusion has just been shattered. James Holloway, a sharp-eyed studio executive, scoffed, loosening his tie. "If that video is real, I'll eat my damn shoes. It's AI-generated. But you know what? It doesn't matter. Perception is reality. And right now, half the world thinks they've been lied to." Michael Trent, one of Tom's longtime publicists, stood near the edge of the room, his expression grim. He exhaled shakily and reached for his phone. He needed to get ahead of this. Calls had to be made. Statements prepared. If Tom walked out of that interview without a strong response, this story would right itself, and not in his favor. Then, in the farthest corner of the room, Ava Morales, a young journalist, just an intern for the network, unnoticed by the bigger players, murmured to herself, "The real story isn't the video." James, the studio executive nearest to her, arched a brow. "Oh? Then what is?" Ava glanced back at the screen where Tom Cruise sat frozen, caught between fury and calculation. "The real story is how he responds." Everyone around Ava, who had heard her last statement, turned to the screens before them and watched silently how Tom would navigate his way out of this video. Langley carefully watched every move Tom Cruise made, a shift in his chair, a deep sigh escaping his lips. He had seen it before, the micro-expressions of a man calculating his next move. But this was different. Tom wasn't just thinking. He was feeling. The weight of the moment pressed on both of them. The air in the studio was thick with anticipation, the audience still trapped in stunned silence. Even the crew, seasoned professionals who had seen their fair share of on-air disasters, barely moved. Langley leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his desk. He thrived on tension. It was the lifeblood of good television. And right now, the tension in that room was palpable enough to taste. Would Tom lash out? Would he deny it outright? Would he walk? Langley didn't know, and that excited him. He had done enough interviews to recognize the patterns. Politicians deflected. Celebrities played the victim. Some cracked, some thrived. But Tom Cruise, he was a wild card. Langley cleared his throat, tilting his head just enough to feign sympathy. "Tom," he said, voice steady, as if he weren't the very man who had just detonated a public relations grenade in front of millions. "You have to understand, this clip is everywhere. People want to know the truth." Tom's jaw tensed. His hands were relaxed, deliberately so, but his eyes told a different story. He was piecing it all together. Langley could almost hear the unspoken thoughts running through the actor's mind. Do I fight this? Laugh it off? Walk away? Langley had spent weeks planning this. The research team had dug into every recent scandal, every fragment of gossip that could add weight to this moment. The AI experts had warned that deepfakes were nearly undetectable now, and that was exactly what made them powerful. But Langley also knew something else, something crucial. It didn't matter if the video was fake. What mattered was how people perceived it. And perception, it was already turning against Tom. Langley observed the ripple effect unfold in real time. The hushed murmurs, the uncertain glances, the way a single seed of doubt could spread like wildfire. A woman in the front row pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide with betrayal. "I always thought he was different," she whispered to the person beside her. A journalist in the press section scribbled furiously, already forming the narrative, "Hollywood's biggest lie?" Backstage, production assistants scrambled for direction. Executives spoke in frantic whispers. Tom's publicist had his phone glued to her ear, trying to get ahead of a disaster that had already slipped through his fingers. But in the center of it all, Tom Cruise sat, unmoving. Langley leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Tom, the world deserves an answer." Tom exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. He had spent decades pushing himself, proving himself, not just as an actor, but as someone who lived by his word. He had risked his life for the stunts they called impossible. He had spent years cultivating trust. And now, he was being asked to defend himself against something he never said. The media wasn't waiting for the truth. They wanted a headline. Tom met Langley's gaze, his frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "This is ridiculous," he said, voice calm but final. Then, without another word, he stood up, unclipped his mic, and walked off the set. Silence. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Langley's smirk twitched ever so slightly. The audience didn't get what they wanted. A meltdown, a desperate denial, a fight. Instead, they were left with a mystery. Why did he walk off? Was he guilty? Was he protecting himself? And just like that, the truth no longer mattered. Just as Tom safely made it behind the stage, his publicist, Michael Trent, was already on his heels. "Tom," he started, but he held up a hand, his expression unreadable. He needed a second, a breath. But the chaos backstage didn't allow it. The moment the studio doors swung shut behind him, the air erupted with frantic voices. Crew members huddled around screens, whispering, eyes darting toward him with something that almost looked like regret. Then came the voice that cut through the noise. "It's a deep fake." Phil Caldwell, the show's director, stood near the control booth, gripping his headset like it had personally betrayed him. His face was flushed, eyes wide as he turned toward the nearest production assistant. "Run it again, frame by frame. Look at the digital distortion, the artifacts around the mouth. This isn't real. It was never real." Gasps, a ripple of disbelief. One of the tech crew swore under his breath. "Holy hell, he's right." Phil snatched up a mic and pressed a button, connecting straight to Langley's earpiece. "Langley," his voice crackled through the connection, urgent. "We got it wrong. The video's fake, a deep fake." Silence from the other end. And then, slowly, Langley turned his head toward the darkened side of the stage, where Tom had disappeared. His fingers tightened around the cue cards in his lap, but there was no script for this. No clever comeback. No way to spin this into something salvageable. For the first time in his career, Langley felt small. He had pushed too far. He had set the fire, and now the flames had swallowed the wrong man. The audience's doubt, the whispers, the headlines that were already forming in people's minds. He had lit the match. And the worst part? Tom knew it. Langley stood slowly, smoothing his suit as he swallowed his pride, then strode toward the backstage doors. There was only one thing left to do: apologize. Backstage, Tom stood with his arms crossed, listening as Michael briefed him in hushed tones. "Experts are already breaking it down," he said. "Phil's team confirmed it. It's a deep fake. They're rushing to correct the narrative, but—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "You know how this works. The damage is done." Tom exhaled, rubbing his temple. Of course he knew. The lie always runs faster than the truth. Before he could respond, the doors swung open and Langley stepped in. For the first time since Tom had walked off, the two men stood face to face. Langley, always composed, always in control, looked different. Not the smug, goading interviewer from minutes ago, but a man who had just realized he'd crossed a line he couldn't erase. "Tom?" Langley started, voice lower than before. Tom shook his head. "It doesn't matter." Langley flinched at that, because Tom wasn't angry. He wasn't lashing out, demanding an apology, or making a scene. He was just disappointed. And that stung more than anything. Langley let out a slow breath. "For what it's worth, Tom turned, already walking toward the exit, but just before leaving he glanced back. "You wanted a story," he said. "You got one. But next time, Langley, make sure it's real." And with that, he was gone. The headlines would be rewritten. Experts would analyze the video frame by frame. The world would learn that Tom Cruise had been framed by technology. But the truth? It would never travel as fast as the lie. Langley knew that. Tom knew that. And now so did everyone watching. Because in the digital age, a single moment of deception can shatter a lifetime of truth.